Hello, we are live, and now we are doing the recap Q&A for episode 6. There are a total of 10 episodes in season 1, and we're now at episode 6. The title is the Iron Rice Bowl, or the Chinese Iron Rice Bowl meets commercial excellence. So I want to welcome everybody. I hope you all had a chance to listen to the episode, but what I want to do is I want to answer your questions, but what I'm going to do until I get more questions is really give a recap of what I thought was really important about this episode and why I made this episode to begin with. All right. So it really talks about this concept of 想办法, which means that I grew up in America, so I notice how kids are taught differently and how that might translate into how people approach different situations after they grow up. Okay. And this is really some of the cultural differences between Western culture and Chinese culture. So 想办法 literally translates into figure out a way, which means you need to try to figure out how to get something accomplished or get something done. You have to figure out a way. The thing that I really notice is that this is kind of how Chinese children are taught for whatever age or task they're trying to complete, is to 想办法, and that is to figure out a way. The thinking behind that is there's two things going on. One is you can't ask for help. You have to figure it out yourself, because in a meritocracy, you're competing with everybody else. So, in China, there are very rigorous exams to get from one level of school to the next level of school. It's extremely competitive. This is what all the crackdown is now about, the private educational sector, because the wealthy children have an advantage because they can hire tutors. Well, when Chinese children are taught, they're taught to 想办法, is they have to try to figure out a way to solve the problem without asking for help. There's another thing that's going on. It's that they are also taught not to question authority. Okay. So this is where the Chinese mindset and the Chinese iron rice bowl mentalities kind of evolve from, where you are not encouraged to ask questions if you don't know the answer. You're encouraged to try to figure out a solution, or to 想办法. Now, I'm not saying this way is right or wrong, but it does change how people approach things as they grow older. And actually, I think there are pros and cons. One of the things that you'll notice when you're working with your Chinese partners or your Chinese employees is they will always be able to figure out a way to accomplish whatever goal you have. Now, if you try to micromanage and tell them how you want them to do something, then you're going to run into all kinds of problems. But you just give them a task or give them a goal and let them figure it out. They can usually figure it out. So that's one of the advantages of this kind of Chinese mentality. And this leads into kind of the other part of this story, which is my experience working at a state-owned enterprise. So one of the things that I also wanted to highlight from the episode is that, not too long ago, like 50 years ago or 60 years ago, China, I think it was 50 years ago, China went through the Great Leap Forward and famine across the country, which means a lot of people starved to death. In fact, I have distant relatives in China, and they would tell me about certain aunts or uncles or grandparents that actually starved to death during the Great Famine. Okay. So what that has done is that has given older generations kind of this survival instinct where if there's no food, you've got to try to figure out what you can do to eat and what you can do to survive. Some of it translates into people being frugal, but another kind of layer and layer of history and culture translates into this mentality of 想办法, which is everybody can just try to figure out a way. There's another thing that I thought was really, really important in this episode that I wanted to point out. And you're going to discover this throughout all of your experiences in China. It's that, nothing in China is designed to be fair. And fairness is one of the things that we talk about, is one of the cultural dichotomies with the West. What is defined as fair? And the thing to keep in mind is, if you go back to just a generation ago, like I think in late 70s, early 80s, Deng Xiaoping told his country, roughly translated, is that people to get rich is glorious. Now, I don't know if he actually said that, but that's what's been interpreted as what he wanted his country to do, to get wealthier, to get richer. But one of the interesting things that he said was, 让一部分的人先富起来. So what does that mean? That means some people should get rich first. Okay. And if you think about that in the context of fairness and, equal rights and things that we talk about in America or in the West, China declared that we're not a level playing field. We want some people to get wealthy first, and they will slowly bring the other people along. And that actually has seemingly worked pretty well. Now China is the number one, or soon to be number one, economy in the world, depending how you want to measure it. And now you can see what China is doing is, now China wants to, I guess for lack of a better word, they want to redistribute that wealth more equally among societies. So now they're cracking down on all the high-tech companies and a lot of things that give wealthy people an advantage over commoners. And this deals with education. It deals with people who have connections in high-tech and industry and stuff like that. And that's just the cycle that China is going through. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens over the next 2 to 3 years as China reverses this. Everybody should try to get wealthy. Now they're trying to distribute that wealth more evenly, not let poor people feel disenfranchised by putting more pressure on wealthy people and trying to use different ways to make things a little bit more equal. All right. So these are all the things that are kind of going on in the background of this episode, because this episode really highlights the experience that I had as a consultant, an on-site consultant at a Chinese state-owned enterprise, or an SOE. And the iron rice bowl mentality. So first, one of the things that I mentioned in the episode is that nothing we say about China or Chinese people applies to all Chinese people. China is not homogeneous. So it wouldn't be a one-size-fits-all for anything that we say. But the China ice bowl mentality represents a large demographic of Chinese people and how they think. And even if younger Chinese people who don't have an iron rice bowl mentality, they've been raised by parents who may have had an iron rice bowl mentality. So there's always this undercurrent of conservatism and not wanting to express an opinion. And that's one of the things that I think is very interesting. And I think one of the things that foreigners also struggle with. We struggle, again, China is a land of contradiction. So Chinese people will be really opinionated on one hand, but when you're in a meeting and you want them to share their opinions, then they're more quiet and they're more conservative. So it's the difference between doing something in private and doing something in public. So this is really what this episode was talking about. So the interesting thing is I talked about my experience with Chinese tea and Chinese tea ceremonies. And I even walked you through a very simple Chinese tea ceremony because I knew I was going to a state-owned enterprise to be on site 5 days a week from morning until evening. And I did that for 40 weeks. So what I did was I brought this Chinese tea brewing set. And what it is, it's kind of like a wooden mesh top that has a tray at the bottom. So you can pour boiling water on top and the bottom will catch the boiling water. And the Chinese tea ceremony is interesting because it does two things that are very culturally significant in China. One is, and this is one of the terms that we talked about, 打发时间. So I talked about the Shanghai Uber driver that I met who worked his entire life at a water processing plant. And his job is basically in the morning, he checks the meters. If they're okay, he checks a box on a little pad that's hanging there. And then he has to do that again before his shift ends. And that's it. That's his job. That's the state-owned enterprise, things that we say are inefficient job, but it keeps people employed and it keeps the economy running and it keeps things going. But he was just bored out of his mind. He needed to 打发时间. So he started driving Uber. So during the day, he could go out, drive a car around, earn a little bit of extra money, and talk with people, talk with new people. And that's kind of like, again, the Chinese iron rice bowl mentality of 打发时间, which is killing time. So Chinese tea ceremonies capture almost the essence of Chinese culture if you really want to feel it and understand it, because you kill time as a ritual during a Chinese tea ceremony because it can last hours. And I had many every day that lasted, anywhere from 20 minutes to several hours just drinking tea. But it's also a great way to deepen the guanxi relationship, okay? Because you're participating in this ritualistic thing. Now, people are probably more familiar with eating and drinking, ganbei and all of that. That's ritualistic too, okay? But, that is in the evenings. You have to consume a lot of alcohol, so you don't really remember what's going on all the time. But the Chinese tea drinking ceremonies, I think, really reflect this aspect of Chinese culture where people just want to kill time as a ritual, but they want to enjoy their time, and they want to use that time to deepen their guanxi relationships. And one of the reasons why the annual project, Commercial Excellence, that we did in Nanjing, before I was hired as the quote-unquote Chinese-speaking consultant, this project failed in China every year. It failed to reach its KPIs. And that's because the local Chinese who were there, they don't want change. They don't want to learn to have effective meetings. They just want to do their work and 过日子, which is to live a comfortable life, put food or rice on the table. The iron rice bowl is a metaphor for a bowl that always has rice, so you're never hungry. And that's really important. For just a generation ago, a large percentage of the population experienced famine and starvation. So that's why it's so kind of deeply embedded into the Chinese mindset, especially with older generations that teach their younger generations that you want to have something stable. Again, with China's high tech and and all of the new technologies that are coming on board, you see a lot of entrepreneurs that take a lot of risk, like in Silicon Valley. But again, China is a land of contradictions. To understand where Chinese thinking comes from doesn't mean that people in China will always think like that. It always depends on the demographic, the age demographic, the location demographic, and also it depends on the industry, whether it's more traditional state-owned industry or whether it's private high tech. The mentalities will be different. So the things that we talk about are just things that you really kind of want to pay attention to. All right. So these are really some of the things that I think were important that I tried to highlight in this episode. So let's just see. The Chinese concept of 想办法. How do you apply that to working with Chinese people? Okay. And what is the mindset that you should have given this topic that we're talking about, 想办法? So first of all, if you want your partners or your employees in China to do something, don't tell them how to do it because they'll figure out a way. Now, that's the positive side of the whole 想办法 thing. The side that we don't like as foreigners is some of the things we talked about in the previous episodes. So, if the Chinese partners and the employees that you're working with, if they're not feeling they're getting the face and the reciprocity that they need in the relationship, the continuous exchange of goodwill, then a lot of times they will 想办法. They will get their goodwill or their reciprocity from other parts of the value chain. Now, what we perceive when that happens is we say, uh-oh, something corrupt has happened because now they're, getting a kickback from here, they're offering something there, and they're using their guanxi to create additional 利益 considerations, impact significance of the relationships that you have. We talked about that in the previous episodes. So some of that might be happening. It's cultural, so it depends on how you view it, but from a Western point of view, a lot of those activities could be negative. So that could be the downside of this 想办法 iron rice bowl mentality. Now, in general, I think it's a good thing. But what you as a foreigner doing business in China, you really need to pay attention to is let your Chinese partners or employees know what goal you want to achieve, and then try to create the parameters where they can succeed in that environment, and don't micromanage how they get there. But in the relationship, make sure that you reciprocate properly in the Chinese cultural context. So what does that mean? Well, a lot of times, if you really don't know what it means, it just means giving face. So every activity, every idea should almost be praised and encouraged, especially in a public setting, because that will apply more social pressure for your partners and employees to perform in a positive way rather than the internal pressure to 想办法, to extract goodwill, to cheat, to steal, to do whatever in a negative way. And I said this many times in the previous content, in the previous episode, is that we can influence Chinese behavior, but it requires awareness, cultural awareness, but it also requires a mindset adjustment. We need to understand how they think, what they value, and why they believe the things they believe, to understand their behavior and how to influence it. And all of the content, whether you read it on Kindle Vella, whether you listen to it on your podcast, or whether you watch it, these recaps on the YouTube video, they're all trying to achieve one goal. And that's help you develop a wider perspective and awareness, and maybe even appreciation of Chinese culture, Chinese values, and Chinese thinking. Because only through this process can your perspective or your mindset start to change and allow you to create more effective and more constructive interaction and communication patterns. All right. So rambling a lot. If you have any questions, you can type them into the chat. I didn't get any email questions this week. So if you have any questions, type them into the chat. If you haven't had a chance to listen to the episode, the links are posted in the description. You can always come back to this video and post your questions in the comments. And I will always be monitoring the questions and answering them as they come up. So again, hope you're enjoying the podcast. Episode 7 drops tomorrow, and I really look forward to how everyone feels about what's to come, because this is really, I think what I'm trying to do is completely different from the hundreds of thousands of other China experts, consultants, trainers, and advisors, because I'm trying to help you think differently so you can achieve a better result, so you can achieve a more rewarding journey into China, because China is an exciting, is a wondrous place that should not be a source of frustration. It should be a source of something very fun, very exciting, and ultimately very rewarding. All right. Again, leave any additional comments in the chat. Look forward to seeing you again next week in the live stream. If you're part of our Facebook community, we have the live Zoom sessions tomorrow. And that's it. Take care, everyone.